Greetings internet, it's Monica, and today I am so excited because I am finally doing a recent reads, a wrap-up reading video. I'm really behind on this. I did not realize that I hadn't uploaded a recent reads wrap-up video since the end of January, and it is now like the beginning of May. So whoops! So I have quite a few books that I want to talk about in this video. I have 15 books in total that I've read over the past few months, and I also want to do my wrap up for the month of April, which was a month where I've started theming my TBRs. It's not something that I think I'll do every single month, but it's been fun doing it for the months that I have done it. So in the month of April, my goal was to read feminist books, and so I had a whole TBR devoted to that, and I've read a good chunk of it. There are a couple books that I didn't get to on it, and then Lala from Books and Lala actually did something really fun where she actually themed her TBR for that month off of another booktuber. So I was the booktuber that she used a TBR from, so it's actually really fun seeing her reactions to the books that I chose for the month. So I'm just gonna jump on in, and starting at the very beginning of February, I read The Hazelwood by Melissa Albert. Now this book had so much hype going into it, and I was so excited. However, it really just wasn't for me. I think the premise for this book is that the main character is sort of constantly moving with her mom, who is a single mom, and they're estranged from her mom, from her grandmother, who is this very cult famous writer of these fairy tale stories. And the premise is that the fairy tales sort of infiltrate the real world, and her mother ends up getting kidnapped, and she has to go figure out what's going on with all of this stuff. Going into it, you kind of expect it to be this very atmospheric fairy tale kind of story, and that's not what the book is at all, which, to be honest, I actually think the first 2/3 of the book is set in New York City. It's set in the everyday world, and it's more of a suspense story. It's more of that finding little pieces of the fairy tale world in our world. And I think what she does so brilliantly is she creates this suspense and had me on the edge of my seat throughout that entire section of reading it. Just really created such amazing buildup. My issue was actually when it came to the more fantastical elements. I just really didn't jive with that world building. The reasonings for things occurring just didn't make sense to me, and the whole structure, it didn't work for me as a reader. I loved those first 2/3 of the book, so I will definitely be reading future things by this author because I loved that section so much. Honestly, what I would compare it to, I don't know if you guys watch Doctor Who, but this is something that I feel would happen very often when I would watch Doctor Who, is that there would be amazing buildup, and it would build up this really amazing mystery, and would create a really great environment for fans to speculate and theorize, but then the actual reveal would just never be up to that. And I kind of feel The Hazelwood kind of suffers from the same thing. So it just wasn't for me, unfortunately. Then I picked up Empress of a Thousand Skies by Rhoda Baliza, and this is a book that I actually hadn't been planning on reading until I saw the author at a Asian authors in YA panel that was happening here in New York City. And it was the most amazing panel that I've ever watched in my entire life. I've never just broken down crying multiple times because the panels hit so close to home, and this one was a panel that did that, and it was actually things that Rhoda had said that really just struck such a chord with me. And so I was so excited going to this book, and I really enjoyed it. This book, it doesn't have the highest ratings on Goodreads, which is why I have a whole thing about not really trusting Goodreads, but I really enjoyed this book. I had so much fun reading it. I guess I should talk about what it's about. It is a space opera kind of story. It takes place intergalactically, on multiple planets, and there's a lot of different wars that have happened between all of them, and it really explores issues like xenophobia and racism, but in this sort of space opera atmosphere. And you follow our main character, who is set to become Empress. Her the whole royal family except for her had been assassinated, and she is sort of out for revenge for her family, and then also dealing with like the stress of becoming Empress. And I thought it was a really fun space opera. I thought it was interesting to see like the different elements of like today's world and how that like still continued into like this sort of very futuristic world, especially things like reality TV. I felt like there are elements of it that reminded me a bit of the Hunger Games, but like in space. Not like, it didn't really have any like challenges in it like the Hunger Games, so just like a couple like character things that I thought were like kind of similar, but like in a good way. I just thought overall the book was like saying really interesting things, and I really enjoyed the characters, and I had a lot of fun reading it. And then I also went on to read the sequel, and I also very much so enjoyed that, and that is it's a duology, so there's only 2 books, and I like all the twists and turns of it like really had me gripped. The thing that I really enjoyed about this book is that it had this sort of space atmosphere that I really like something along more the lines of like Guardians of the Galaxy versus like a more realistic space story, sci-fi story that might be a bit more barren space-wise, whereas I really liked the fact that you had like the complete cultures on all these different worlds, and I thought that was really fun. Then I listened to The Poet X, and this book was fantastic. I highly, highly recommend especially reading it via audiobook because the author reads it, and she reads it because it is a story told in verse, and it's very much so in like a slam poetry style, and she reads it in that style, and so it's just so effective. It's so beautifully written and told. So this story follows Xiomara, who is a Latinx teen girl growing up in Harlem, and her family is very religious and very strict. And this is about her finding her voice through poetry. Then I read If You Come Softly by Jacqueline Woodson, and this is actually a book that was like one of my favorite books when I was like a young teenager, like 12, 13. I was nervous going into it because I loved it so much when I was younger, and a lot of the books that I loved when I was younger I like haven't held up as much, or like I haven't loved them as much as an adult, and this one did. This one was so beautiful. It's sort of the star-crossed lover story. And so it follows this couple. The girl is white and Jewish, and the boy is black, and they both go to this like prestigious prep school in the city, and it follows their sort of romance. But at the same time, it explores the fact that their love is one that is constantly being judged by the outside world. It's just so beautifully written, and it's wild to me that the story and the messages of the story are like this story could have been written yesterday. It is just as like unfortunately just as relevant as it was 20 years ago. Then I picked up Simon versus the Homo Sapiens Agenda. I read this like literally the day before going to see the film, so just got it right in there at the final moment, and I loved it. Oh my gosh, it was so cute. I can't believe I waited so long to read this one. Everyone loves this book, and I loved it too. It was just like made me so happy. It's just like such a happy, lovely contemporary. I loved all the characters, and I of course loved the film. I've seen it a couple of times now, and every time I've cried because it's just so beautiful and perfect. And yeah, I can't wait to just watch that film over and over and over again forever because it's wonderful. Then I read Dear Martin by Nick Stone, and I'm so happy that I finally read this one. It's a very short book. This book follows Justice McAllister, who is black and is attending a prep school that is filled with mostly white rich kids, and he is one of the few like people of color in general in this school, who at the very beginning of the story is arrested after trying to help someone. A police officer sees him like trying to help this girl home and just assumes that he is trying to attack her and like arrests him, and it like causes this huge thing, and he goes on this quest of writing like letters to MLK and trying to just like figure out how to exist basically in racist America. The story just takes a very hard look at that, and just sort of from the very like obvious racism to the racism that you just experience even from friends. I just thought it was absolutely brilliant. I think Nick Stone is an amazing writer, and I can't wait to read future books by her. Then began my April Feminism Reads Month, and I started the month off by reading Women and Power, a manifesto. And a manifesto, this book was not. I liked this book well enough. A lot of the ideas I thought were really interesting. Like I wouldn't not recommend reading it, because one of the things that I love that she discusses is the whole idea of when we talk about women in power, it's often about how to give women the power, like what we already perceive as power, as opposed to changing our perception of power. And this really struck a chord with me, because I feel like constantly, especially if you read like advice around like business and how to like work as a woman in business or like any industry, you're always told to like act more like a man basically, and to be meaner and more forward. And I don't think there's anything wrong with like confidence and going after what you want, but I think that that's really only half of the conversation. And I think the other half of the conversation has to be like, maybe there's some toxic masculinity happening in the workplace, and we should really look at that and try and cultivate a better culture of kindness. I don't think that there's anything wrong with being nice and with treating other people with respect. And I think a lot of the sort of discussion around power is not so much about like how to actually change what power is, but about like how to just like keep the status quo, but also bring women into that. And I think that that just creates, it doesn't really change like anything. So I thought like those ideas that she talked about were really interesting, and I really enjoyed that. However, I just sort of felt like it wasn't a manifesto. You know, it was 2 speeches that were sort of turned into these like 2 essays. And I just didn't like really leave with any sort of like drive to change anything after. It was just sort of like, so here's some ideas, and then that was the end. After that, I read, and I kind of regret this, I read The Wicked King by Holly Black. This is the sequel to The Cruel Prince, and if you're like, I didn't think that came out for a little while, you'd be right, because that book doesn't come out until January of 2019. I read it too early. I was just so excited. I really liked The Cruel Prince. I thought it was like a really fun addition to the sort of like fae fantasy world. I think Holly Black is very much so one of the best writers of that, definitely better than the very popular one that is currently happening that I'm not going to talk about. I thought it like built up to this really amazing story that was like ended up being very different and very fun. If you're not familiar with The Cruel Prince, it follows our main character who when she's a young child, a fae lord comes to her house and kills both of her parents and takes her and her sisters to live with him in the fae world. And she grows up in that world just trying like her number one goal is just to like fit in and survive and to gain power. I somehow got my hands on the second book and I read it immediately, and I was very distraught because no one else has read it except for like a handful of people. But I'm very happy that I read it because it was so good. And if you have not read The Cruel Prince, I highly recommend it. The sequel, The Cruel Prince I liked a lot, but the sequel I loved. And I'm not going to talk about that anymore because it doesn't come out until January. And so literally, this is probably just very annoying for anyone who's watching it who's like, I can't read it. But then back into the feminism books, I read Girl Made of Stars by Ashley Herring Blake, and this book was a difficult read. It is all about rape culture. It follows our main character whose twin brother rapes her best friend, and it is basically about how her family, her friends, her community deal with the aftermath of that. And it was a really difficult read, but it was absolutely amazing. I adore this book. I can't recommend it enough. Obviously, huge trigger warnings for this book. If you can't read about sexual assault, if you know that would be triggering for you, or you just don't want to read about that topic, then don't read this book, because it's the entirety of what the book is about. I think what is so powerful about this story is the fact that the twin brother, you like him. When you're reading the book, he is not someone that you're like, oh yeah, he's awful, I hate him. You read the book and you see him being kind, and you see him being a good brother, and having these really lovely moments with his sister and other people. And I think that's what's so powerful about it, is because so much of the media, whenever someone does something horrible, it's about finding the proof that they were a monster. And I think that that is like such a huge problem. Like, it doesn't take a Voldemort to do something truly evil or awful. And I think that that idea in our media and our justice system is part of the problem. It's leading to, you know, rape convictions being so low because people assume that, like, oh, this person seems like a decent guy and he, you know, gets straight A's and he's a good part of the community. Like, he would never do something that awful. And I think it's really important to have stories where you have a, like, good person who does something awful and having people sort of reconcile with that. So it was, I think, a really brilliant read, a really important read, and I definitely recommend picking it up if you haven't. Then I have a couple more books that weren't really part of my feminism reads, but I still read them anyways. The first one is The Girl from the Other Side. This is a manga, and I picked this one up with my friends Emma and Elena when we were book shopping together, and I just really liked it. I can't wait to read future stories in the series. I can't say I loved it because I think it was a lot of like introduction to everything, but I definitely can see myself loving this series. It takes place in this world where there are two kingdoms, and there's the inside where the humans live safe and secure, and there's the outside where beasts roam. And if you're touched by one of the beasts, you then turn into one. And the story is about this little girl who lives with a beast, and it is like so interesting because it's like their interactions and their relationship is like so cute and I love it, but then it's like also very dark when it comes to like how the inside deals with their fear of the outside. If you like that sort of juxtaposition, I really recommend it. And I thought the art was just like really pretty, and I can't wait to continue definitely with this series. I like when I last showed this one on my Instagram story, I got so many replies like saying how much they love this series, so I guess it is a very well-loved one. Then I read My Lady's Choosing. This is a choose your own adventure romance novel, and I really didn't like it. I was so excited about this book. I like saw it and bought it on the spot. I was so hyped for it because I loved choose your own adventure stories when I was younger. However, I just like, even though you are buying it for the novelty of it, I still wanted like the stories to be good, and I just sort of didn't feel that way at all when I was reading it. Then back into the feminist books, I picked up Juliet Takes a Breath. Juliet is a Puerto Rican lesbian living in Harlem, and she is sort of finding her feminism at the start of the book, and she ends up really connecting with this story that is written by this white woman who lives in Portland. She ends up going to Portland to intern for her, and it's basically about Juliet dealing with white feminism and the frustrations of that. And it's so like, there's so many passages of this book that I highlighted that are just so on point. I thought it dealt with the issues of racism in liberal communities so well. The writing style wasn't my absolute favorite, but for me, honestly, like that, like it's not what my concern about this book is. Like when I read this book, like I wasn't like really thinking that much about the writing style. I was just like, oh my gosh, she said this thing that is so real and important, and I'm so glad that someone is like giving a voice to these issues. Then I picked up The Witches of New York, and yeah, I wanted to love this book. It's set in the 1800s, follows witches, but to be honest, it is diviners. It is, if you have read Diviners, you have read this book. It's very frustrating because the writing of it is really good. Not as good as Diviners in my opinion. Like when I was reading Diviners, like I just felt so compelled to keep reading. And even though Libba Bray can be very verbose, I feel like I always enjoy her being verbose, and I never feel like, oh my gosh, I just wish you would get on with it, or nothing's happening. Whereas with The Witches of New York, I very much so felt like that, and having this sort of feminist paranormal historical story set in this time period, I think is amazing. It was just like, for me, I got so frustrated with how similar it was to Diviners that I ended up just like not really enjoying it, which was really unfortunate. But if that's not something that you think will frustrate you, then maybe you will really enjoy this book. So yeah, those are all of the books that I have recently read over the past few months. I will try not to wait quite so long to do a wrap up again. My bad. I just didn't think that I had read this much, to be honest. If you've read any of these books and you would like to discuss them, please leave a comment down below. Or if you just have a book recommendation for me, I am always looking for more books, which is a problem, but here I am. If you liked this video, be sure to give it a like, and if you are not subscribed yet, be sure to do that too. If you are already subscribed, you can click the little bell icon, and that will send you a notification anytime I upload, and I will talk to y'all next time. Bye!